Hello, and welcome to History at Night. When you hear the words Roman Empire, what comes to mind? Perhaps you picture towering marble temples, victorious legions marching beneath golden standards, or emperors ruling over the greatest civilization on earth. It is a world that often feels larger than life, a world of unimaginable wealth, engineering wonders, grand spectacles, and power stretching across 3 continents. But what was it actually like to live there? Not as an emperor, not as a famous general, not as a senator whose name survived in history books. What was it like to wake up as an ordinary person in the Roman Empire during its golden age? To walk its crowded streets, to buy bread in its markets, to raise a family beneath its laws, to work, dream, struggle, and grow old inside the most powerful empire the ancient world had ever seen. Tonight, we will leave behind the marble statues and heroic legends to explore something far more fascinating: the daily reality. We will step inside bustling cities that never seemed to sleep. We will discover what people really ate, how they earned a living, and why millions believed they were living at the center of the world. We will uncover the hidden labor that kept the empire running, the astonishing technology that connected distant lands, and the darker truths quietly hiding beneath an age often remembered as Rome's greatest triumph. And along the way, we may find that the people of ancient Rome were not nearly as different from us as we sometimes imagine. But before we begin, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel. It is a simple thing, but it truly helps support the channel, and I genuinely appreciate it. I am also always curious to know where in the world you are listening from and what time it is where you are. So be sure to share that in the comments below. And now, settle in. Let the noise of the modern world slowly drift away. Allow your mind to wander across ancient roads, through crowded forums, beneath soaring aqueducts, and into a civilization that seemed destined to last forever. Tonight, we travel back nearly 2,000 years to the height of Rome. Imagine waking before sunrise in the richest city on earth. Not the richest city of our time, but the richest city of the ancient world. A place so vast, crowded, and interconnected that many visitors must have felt as if they had stepped into the center of civilization itself. The year is somewhere during the height of the Roman Empire, perhaps in the 2nd century AD, when Roman power stretched from the misty edges of Britain to the deserts of the Near East. As the first pale light begins to creep across the horizon, Rome is already stirring. You open your eyes in a city unlike anything most human beings had ever seen. Even today, historians debate exactly how many people lived here at its peak. Some estimates suggest around 1 million inhabitants, an astonishing number for the ancient world. Whether the figure was slightly lower or slightly higher, the reality remains the same. Rome was enormous. For many travelers arriving from distant provinces, the city must have seemed impossibly large, a place where the streets never truly emptied and where people from countless cultures crossed paths every single day. The morning begins before the sun fully rises. Somewhere nearby, footsteps echo against stone. A cart rattles over uneven pavement. Voices drift upward through narrow streets. The city has a rhythm of its own, and that rhythm starts early. Unlike modern cities illuminated by electric light, Rome depended heavily on daylight. Work, trade, transport, and daily life all revolved around the movement of the sun. Every hour of daylight mattered. If you happen to live among the wealthy, your morning looks very different from that of most Romans. Behind thick walls and elegant courtyards, affluent families wake in spacious houses known as domus. These residences often occupy valuable urban land and are designed around open-air courtyards where sunlight enters the heart of the home. Decorative mosaics cover floors, frescoes brighten walls, water splashes softly from fountains fed by the city's remarkable infrastructure. To modern eyes, some of these homes might seem surprisingly sophisticated. But most people do not live this way. The majority of Rome's population occupies apartment buildings called insulae. These structures rise several stories above crowded streets, housing families, workers, migrants, and laborers. Some are reasonably built, others are notorious for poor construction. Ancient writers occasionally complained about collapsing buildings, and while such accounts may contain exaggeration, they point toward a genuine concern. Living high above the street often means climbing long staircases, carrying water, and enduring cramped conditions. The higher your apartment, the less desirable it usually becomes. From your window, the city slowly reveals itself. Smoke begins rising from cooking fires. Merchants prepare stores. Laborers gather tools. Somewhere in the distance, temple roofs catch the first golden rays of sunlight. What makes the scene remarkable is not simply its size, but its complexity. Rome functions because an enormous system operates beneath the surface, much of it invisible to casual observers. Consider water. For many ancient cities, access to clean water is a constant challenge. Rome approaches the problem on a scale rarely seen before the modern era. Aqueducts carry water across valleys, hills, and vast distances using carefully engineered gradients. Some water travels dozens of miles before reaching the city. The achievement is so impressive that even today it remains difficult not to admire the ambition behind it. Yet the aqueducts are more than engineering marvels. They shape everyday life. Water flows into fountains, baths, workshops, and homes. Public fountains allow ordinary residents to collect what they need. In some neighborhoods, the sound of running water becomes part of the city's identity. It is easy to take such conveniences for granted until you realize how unusual they are in the ancient world. As the streets grow busier, another truth becomes impossible to ignore. Rome is not merely a city. It is the beating heart of an empire. The bread you eat may depend on grain harvested hundreds of miles away. The oil used for cooking may have traveled from Spain. Marble may arrive from Greece, North Africa, or distant quarries controlled by imperial power. The city consumes resources on a scale that few places in history have matched. This dependence creates a fascinating paradox. Rome appears invincible. Wealth flows in from every direction. Goods arrive continuously, The population grows. Monumental buildings rise across the skyline. Yet such prosperity depends upon systems that must function with remarkable precision. Ships must sail safely. Roads must remain open. Provinces must remain productive. Political stability must endure. The city's strength is immense, but it is also interconnected in ways many residents may scarcely notice. As you step into the street, the human diversity of Rome becomes impossible to miss. Contrary to popular imagination, this is not a city populated solely by people who look or sound alike. The empire connects regions spanning 3 continents. Merchants, sailors, soldiers, administrators, freedmen, slaves, and travelers arrive from countless backgrounds. Languages overlap, accents mix, different styles of clothing appear side by side. In some districts, you might hear conversations reflecting origins thousands of miles apart. For a newcomer, this diversity could feel exhilarating. It could also feel overwhelming. Everywhere you look, signs of ambition appear. Young men hurry toward opportunities. Merchants negotiate prices before the day fully begins. Craftsmen prepare workshops. Officials conduct business. Even before breakfast, Rome is already competing, trading, building, and expanding. There is a sense that something important is always happening somewhere nearby. Yet beneath the grandeur lies another reality. Not everyone shares equally in the empire's prosperity. Some residents wake, worried about finding work. Others depend on unstable incomes. Many live one accident, illness, or financial setback away from hardship. Ancient Rome generates extraordinary wealth, but wealth is distributed unevenly. The contrast between luxury and struggle can exist on the same street, sometimes separated by only a few doors. This contrast may be one reason Rome fascinates modern observers. It feels strangely familiar. The technology is ancient. The clothing is different. The beliefs often seem distant. Yet the city wrestles with challenges recognizable today: inequality, migration, housing shortages, economic opportunity, public infrastructure, and the tension between private wealth and public life. As morning advances, sunlight spreads across temples, markets, monuments, and crowded intersections. The city grows louder. Wheels grind against stone roads. Animals move through traffic. Vendors call out offers. Children weave through crowds. Somewhere beyond the rooftops, massive public buildings stand as reminders of imperial confidence. They are intended not only to serve practical purposes, but also to communicate power. And perhaps that is what strikes you most. Rome does not merely function as the capital of an empire. It performs the role. Every road, monument, public square, and towering structure sends the same message. This is the center of the world. Whether that message was entirely true depends on whom you ask. People living in distant provinces may have seen things differently. Historians continue debating how ordinary citizens understood the empire around them. But standing here in the cool morning air, surrounded by a city larger and wealthier than almost anything else on earth, it becomes easy to understand why so many Romans believed they lived at the peak of human achievement. The day has barely begun, yet already the city feels limitless. Around the next corner waits another district, another crowd, another story. Somewhere beyond the rooftops, ships unload cargo from distant lands. Somewhere else, officials make decisions that affect millions of people. And as Rome awakens fully beneath the rising sun, one question quietly emerges above all others. What was daily life actually like for the countless people who called this extraordinary place home? By mid-morning, it becomes clear that the true wonder of Rome is not any single temple, monument, or palace. It is movement. Everything moves. People move. Goods move. Information moves. Wealth moves. Even power itself seems to flow through the city like a living current. And once you step fully into the streets, you begin to understand why some ancient writers described Rome less as a city and more as an entire world compressed into one place. The crowds thicken as the sun climbs higher. Narrow lanes spill into wider avenues. Faces appear and disappear in an endless stream. Every direction offers another distraction, another transaction, another story unfolding in real time. A visitor expecting the calm dignity often associated with ancient ruins would be shocked by the reality. Rome is loud. Rome is crowded. Rome is restless. In some ways, it may have felt closer to a modern megacity than most people imagine. The noise arrives first, metal striking metal, merchants calling out prices, donkeys braying, wheels rattling over stone roads worn smooth by generations of traffic. Somewhere nearby, a blacksmith works near a furnace hot enough to glow even in daylight. Elsewhere, construction crews shape stone blocks destined for another building project. Rome is constantly rebuilding itself. New monuments rise, old structures are repaired. Wealthy patrons compete to leave lasting marks upon the urban landscape. The city never seems finished. It is always becoming something larger than it was the year before. This endless construction reveals something important about Roman society. Prosperity is not standing still. It is expansion made visible. Every new building announces confidence in the future. Every renovation suggests a belief that Rome's best days are still ahead. Whether that confidence was justified is a question historians continue to debate. But for the people living here during the empire's golden age, there are reasons to believe the momentum might continue forever. As you move deeper into the city, the smell changes from street to street. Fresh bread drifts from bakeries. Smoke rises from cooking fires. Fish sellers display catches brought from nearby ports. Spices from distant provinces add unfamiliar scents to the air. Yet mixed among these pleasant aromas are less appealing realities. Animal waste, refuse, crowded living conditions. Ancient cities lacked many of the sanitation systems modern people take for granted. Rome possessed impressive engineering, but no city housing hundreds of thousands, or perhaps over 1 million people, could entirely escape the challenges created by density. This contrast appears everywhere. Extraordinary sophistication existing beside very ordinary problems. One moment you are standing near a magnificent public building decorated with imported marble. The next, you step around a puddle whose origins are probably best left unexamined. Rome constantly reminds you that greatness and inconvenience often grow together. The city's markets provide perhaps the clearest window into this reality. Every market feels like a miniature version of the empire itself. Traders display goods from astonishing distances. Olive oil arrives from Hispania. Fine textiles travel from the eastern provinces. Exotic animals occasionally appear as symbols of Rome's reach into distant lands. Grain arrives in quantities difficult to comprehend. Some estimates suggest that feeding Rome required an enormous logistical network extending across the Mediterranean. A disruption in grain deliveries could become a political problem almost immediately. Food is not merely commerce here. Food is stability. Food is power. Food is survival. Watching these markets operate raises an intriguing possibility. Perhaps the Roman Empire was held together not only by armies and laws, but also by supply chains. Historians naturally emphasize military victories and political leaders. Yet ordinary citizens experienced the empire through daily necessities. Bread available at a reasonable price mattered. Reliable imports mattered. Access to goods from distant provinces mattered. The empire's success may have depended as much upon moving resources efficiently as winning battles. While merchants negotiate and customers crowd around stalls, another layer of the city reveals itself. Information moves through Rome almost as quickly as goods. News travels constantly. Some reports come from travelers arriving by road. Others come from sailors entering port. Rumors spread through bathhouses, workshops, markets, and public squares. In a world without newspapers as we know them today, conversation becomes a powerful communication network. Information changes shape as it travels. A military victory may become larger with every retelling. A political scandal may acquire details no one can verify. A distant crisis may sound more immediate than it actually is. Human nature, it seems, has not changed much over 2,000 years. People remain fascinated by stories. They always want to know what happened, who is responsible, and what might happen next. As the day continues, another reality becomes visible. Rome is crowded because opportunity exists here. Throughout the empire, ambitious individuals are drawn toward the capital. Some hope to become successful merchants. Others seek government positions. Some dream of patronage from wealthy elites. A few arrive with almost nothing, hoping the city itself will somehow provide a path upward. Not everyone succeeds. In fact, many probably do not. Yet the possibility of advancement exerts a powerful attraction. Great cities often function this way. They promise more than they can deliver, yet they continue drawing newcomers because occasionally those promises become reality. Looking upward, you notice how tightly packed parts of the city have become. Apartment buildings lean over narrow streets. Upper stories seem close enough to touch. Ancient authors sometimes complained about overcrowding, and archaeological evidence supports the idea that urban space was precious. Every available area appears to have value. This density creates energy, but also vulnerability. Fire is perhaps the greatest fear. In a city built partly from wood and filled with cooking flames, lamps, workshops, and crowded housing, fire remains a constant threat. Some blazes become local disasters. Others grow into catastrophes capable of consuming entire neighborhoods. People understand this danger because they live with it every day. The possibility of sudden destruction lurks beneath ordinary life. It is a reminder that even the richest city in the world remains fragile. Wealth cannot eliminate every risk. In fact, concentration itself sometimes creates new dangers. As afternoon approaches, traffic becomes increasingly difficult. Moving through Rome is not always easy. Ancient authorities occasionally restricted certain types of vehicles during daylight hours, partly because congestion could become overwhelming. Imagine a city packed with pedestrians, animals, carts, merchants, laborers, officials, and travelers, all competing for limited space. Movement requires patience. Delays are common. Arguments undoubtedly occur. Yet somehow the system continues functioning. This may be one of Rome's most remarkable achievements. Not perfection, but endurance. The city absorbs enormous pressure without completely breaking apart. Beneath the apparent chaos lies a degree of organization that keeps everything moving forward. The longer you observe, the more another question emerges. Did Romans themselves realize how unusual their city was? Perhaps some did. Travelers arriving from smaller towns must have noticed immediately. Yet people often adapt quickly to extraordinary circumstances. What astonishes outsiders eventually becomes normal to residents. The fountains, crowds, imported goods, massive construction projects, an endless flow of commerce may have faded into the background for those who encountered them every day. Human beings possess a remarkable ability to normalize even the most extraordinary environments. This possibility adds another layer of fascination. The greatest city of its age may have felt ordinary to many who lived there. As daylight slowly begins its descent, the crowds show little sign of disappearing. Business continues, negotiations continue, construction continues, deliveries continue. Rome does not seem to pause. It breathes, expands, consumes, produces, and transforms itself hour after hour. The city generates a strange impression. It feels permanent, yet everything within it is constantly changing. Buildings rise, fortunes grow and collapse. New arrivals replace those who leave, trends shift, power moves from one hand to another. Beneath the appearance of stability lies endless motion. Perhaps that is the true secret of Rome's golden age, not stillness, but momentum. The city survives because it never stops moving, and as shadows begin stretching across the streets and another crowd gathers somewhere beyond the next corner, you start to wonder about the countless lives hidden behind those walls, above those shops, and within those crowded buildings. What did people eat after such busy days? What filled their tables, their cups, and their conversations when the noise of the city finally gave way to evening? As evening begins to settle over the city, the noise does not disappear so much as change its character. The merchants who spent the day shouting prices now negotiate their final sales. Workers drift home through crowded streets. Lamps flicker to life behind windows and doorways. The smell of smoke hangs lightly in the air. Somewhere nearby, bread is still baking. Somewhere else, wine is already being poured. And if you truly want to understand how people lived in the Roman Empire during its golden age, there may be no better place to begin than the table. Food reveals things that monuments cannot. It exposes social class, trade networks, daily routines, hidden anxieties, and even political stability. The Roman world often appears distant from ours, yet the moment people gather to eat, it suddenly feels familiar again. The first surprise is that many foods modern people associate with Italy simply do not exist here. There are no tomatoes, no pizza, no pasta covered in tomato sauce. Tomatoes will not arrive from the Americas for more than 1,000 years. Potatoes are unknown. Corn is unknown. Chocolate is unknown. Even coffee remains centuries in the future. Remove these familiar ingredients from your imagination, and an entirely different culinary landscape begins to emerge. Bread stands at the center of everything. For ordinary Romans, bread is not a side dish. It is life itself. Every day, massive quantities are baked across the city. The smell drifts through neighborhoods before dawn. Bakers work through the night because demand never stops. Grain arriving from North Africa and Egypt helps feed an urban population that could never sustain itself through local agriculture alone. Some historians have argued that securing grain shipments was among the most important responsibilities of imperial government. This may sound dramatic until you imagine what would happen if bread suddenly became scarce in a city of hundreds of thousands of hungry people. Stability and food are deeply connected, perhaps more deeply than many political histories acknowledge. Walking through the city, you quickly realize that bread comes in many forms. Wealthier households enjoy finer loaves made from carefully milled flour. Poorer residents often eat darker, coarser varieties. Yet across social classes, bread remains a constant presence. It accompanies meals, absorbs sauces, and provides calories necessary for daily work. Archaeological discoveries, including preserved loaves from sites such as ancient Pompeii, offer remarkably direct glimpses into what people actually consumed. There is something strangely intimate about seeing a loaf of bread baked nearly 2,000 years ago. It reminds us that history is not only emperors and battles. It is breakfast. It is hunger. It is ordinary people trying to get through another day. Olive oil occupies a similarly important place. In many Roman households, olive oil serves functions that modern people might divide among several products. It is used in cooking, preservation, lighting, and even personal care. Vast quantities travel throughout the empire. Amphorae carrying oil move across the Mediterranean in such numbers that fragments still appear in archaeological sites today. The empire's trade routes are visible not only through monuments, but through the remains of containers that once held everyday necessities. If bread is the foundation of the Roman diet, olive oil is often the substance that binds it together. Yet perhaps the most fascinating Roman food is one that many modern people might hesitate to try. Nearly everywhere you go, you encounter a condiment called garum. Produced through the fermentation of fish, garum appears in recipes across the Roman world. To modern ears, fermented fish sauce may sound unusual, but similar products remain popular in various cultures today. The smell during production was likely intense enough to discourage nearby residents, yet the finished product became enormously valuable. Some varieties were inexpensive and widely available. Others achieved premium status and commanded high prices. Its popularity raises an interesting possibility. Taste itself is historical. What seems strange to one era may feel completely normal to another. If a Roman somehow appeared at a modern dinner table, they might be equally puzzled by some of our favorite foods. Fish appears frequently on Roman tables, especially in coastal regions and wealthy households. Fresh fish, salted fish, shellfish, and preserved seafood all play important roles. The Mediterranean serves not merely as a body of water, but as a highway connecting food systems across enormous distances. A fish caught far from Rome can still influence what appears on a Roman plate. This interconnectedness is easy to overlook until you realize how many meals depend upon trade. The empire is constantly feeding itself through movement. Grain moves, oil moves, wine moves, fish moves, spices move. Food tells the story of an empire every bit as clearly as military campaigns. For poorer Romans, however, meals often remain simple. Bread, porridge, vegetables, legumes, occasionally cheese, perhaps some fruit when available. Archaeological evidence and surviving texts suggest that many ordinary people lived on diets that were practical rather than luxurious. Yet practicality should not automatically be confused with misery. Some nutrition historians argue that aspects of Mediterranean diets offer genuine health advantages, though exact conclusions remain debated because evidence varies by region, class, and time period. What seems clear is that daily meals differed dramatically depending on wealth. This contrast becomes impossible to ignore once you enter the world of elite dining. Here, the Roman table transforms into theater. Wealthy hosts do not merely serve food, they display status. Guests recline while dining. Servants move between courses. Exotic ingredients appear. Rare spices signal access to distant trade networks. Elaborate presentations create conversation. A banquet becomes part meal, part performance, part social competition. Some surviving accounts describe extravagant dishes involving animals, imported delicacies, and culinary surprises designed to impress guests. Ancient writers occasionally mocked such excess, which makes it difficult to know where reality ends and satire begins. Even so, there is little doubt that elite dining could reach extraordinary levels of extravagance. The purpose was often larger than food itself. A banquet demonstrated influence, wealth, and connections. Every dish communicated something. Wine flows through nearly every level of Roman society. Yet Roman wine culture differs from modern expectations in several ways. Wine is often diluted with water before consumption. Drinking undiluted wine could be viewed by some as excessive or uncivilized. Different regions produce different varieties. Certain wines gain reputations for quality. Trade spreads them throughout the empire. Wine accompanies daily life so thoroughly that it becomes difficult to separate Roman culture from Roman drinking habits. Yet this familiarity creates another mystery. How much did Romans actually enjoy the flavor compared to the symbolism? Perhaps the answer varied. For some, wine was pleasure. For others, habit. for others still, a marker of identity and status. Human relationships with food and drink are rarely simple. They carry meanings beyond nutrition. As darkness spreads across the city, taverns begin filling with customers. Here, the atmosphere differs sharply from elite banquets. Conversations grow louder. Travelers exchange stories. Laborers relax after exhausting days. News circulates alongside food and drink. In many ways, these establishments function as social centers where information spreads through informal networks. A visitor hoping to understand daily Roman life might learn more in an evening tavern than during an afternoon spent admiring monuments. People reveal themselves most honestly when they gather around food. And yet, despite all this abundance, one question lingers beneath the surface. How secure was Rome's food supply really? The city's appetite was enormous. Feeding such a population required extraordinary coordination. Grain fleets crossed dangerous waters. Harvests depended on weather. Political stability affected distribution. Most years, the system functioned. But its scale created vulnerability. A delayed shipment could become a crisis. A failed harvest could ripple through entire regions. The abundance visible on Roman tables depended upon networks stretching far beyond the horizon. Perhaps that is why food remains such a revealing lens through which to view the empire. Every loaf of bread, every amphora of oil, every cup of wine represented countless invisible connections linking farmers, sailors, merchants, laborers, and consumers across thousands of miles. The meal before you may appear simple, but hidden inside it is the story of an empire. And as the last light fades beyond the rooftops, and conversations continue deep into the evening, another question begins to emerge from the shadows. If food sustained Rome, who actually performed the work that kept this vast machine running day after day, year after year, across a world larger than most people could ever hope to see? As the evening meal fades into memory, and another Roman day begins preparing itself beyond the darkness, a deeper question starts to emerge beneath all the bread, wine, markets, and crowded streets. How did people actually earn a living in a city this large? The monuments survive. The emperors dominate the history books. The victories are carved into stone. Yet none of those things explain how ordinary Romans paid rent, fed children, repaired roofs, bought clothing, or survived another month. Somewhere behind every loaf of bread stood a baker. Behind every building stood a mason. Behind every shipment stood a sailor. Behind every luxury stood countless workers whose names history rarely preserved. The empire often appears from a distance as a machine powered by emperors and armies. But up close, it begins to look more like an endless struggle to earn enough money before the next sunrise. The first thing you notice at dawn is how quickly people get to work. There is no long commute in the modern sense, but there is urgency. Workshops open early. Markets awaken before sunrise. Construction sites fill with laborers. Deliveries begin moving through the streets while temperatures remain manageable. In many occupations, daylight is money. Every lost hour matters. Every delay has consequences. Life in Rome can be prosperous, but prosperity is unevenly distributed, and for most people, survival still requires effort. A surprising number of Romans spend their lives working with their hands. Archaeology often reveals traces of these professions long after their owners disappeared. Blacksmiths shape tools, hinges, locks, and nails. Potters create everything from cooking vessels to storage containers. Leather workers produce sandals, belts, harnesses, and military equipment. Carpenters build furniture, carts, doors, and roofing structures. Some workshops are family businesses passed through generations. Others employ apprentices hoping to learn valuable skills. The smell of smoke, wood shavings, hot metal, and fresh clay becomes part of the city's daily atmosphere. In many ways, Rome is a city built not only by wealth but by craftsmanship. Yet skilled labor is only one piece of the puzzle. Commerce itself creates enormous opportunities. The empire's trade networks connect regions thousands of miles apart, and wherever goods move, merchants appear. Some operate small stalls selling local products. Others manage enterprises large enough to influence entire markets. Ancient Roman society sometimes viewed merchants with a mixture of admiration and suspicion. Success could bring wealth and status, but profit-making occasionally carried cultural baggage among elites who preferred to associate themselves with land ownership rather than direct commercial activity. Reality, however, often ignored such ideals. Trade generated money, and money generated influence. The empire could not function without people willing to buy, sell, transport, and negotiate. Walking through commercial districts, you quickly realize that information may be nearly as valuable as goods themselves. Knowing where grain prices are rising, knowing which port received a delayed shipment, knowing which governor changed regulations. Economic advantage often begins with knowledge. This observation feels surprisingly modern. 2,000 years separate Rome from our world, yet successful people still depend upon access to information before competitors acquire it. Some aspects of human behavior seem remarkably resistant to time. Not every occupation offers mobility. Day laborers occupy a far more uncertain position. If you need workers to unload cargo, move stone, dig foundations, or carry materials, you hire laborers. When work exists, they earn money. When it disappears, problems begin quickly. For these individuals, stability can be fragile. Historical sources do not always allow us to reconstruct exact wages with confidence, but evidence suggests many workers lived close to economic vulnerability. One injury, one illness, one missed opportunity. Sometimes the difference between security and hardship could be alarmingly small. This uncertainty may explain why patronage remains such an important social force throughout Roman society. Connections matter, relationships matter. Knowing the right person can open doors unavailable through talent alone. Wealthy patrons often support clients who, in return, provide services, loyalty, or political backing. Modern observers sometimes struggle to categorize these relationships because they blend personal, social, and economic functions. Yet for many Romans, such networks offer practical advantages in a competitive environment. Success rarely occurs in isolation. Another path toward advancement runs through education. Literacy rates vary considerably across regions and social classes, But reading and writing create opportunities unavailable to many laborers. Scribes, accountants, administrators, and secretaries perform essential functions throughout the empire. Government bureaucracy, trade records, legal contracts, and financial transactions all require individuals capable of handling information accurately. While ancient Rome is often remembered for physical infrastructure, an administrative infrastructure also exists beneath the surface. Records must be maintained. Taxes must be tracked. Laws must be documented. Messages must be transmitted. Empires are held together not only by roads and soldiers, but by paperwork. Teachers occupy an interesting position within this world. Education is valued, especially among those seeking advancement, yet teaching itself does not always bring great wealth. Some instructors earn respectable incomes, others struggle. Ancient complaints about difficult students, demanding parents, and insufficient pay occasionally sound familiar enough to have been written yesterday. Human institutions change, but certain frustrations seem eternal. Beyond the city streets lies another reality that urban residents often overlook. Agriculture remains the foundation beneath everything else. Most people throughout the empire still live in rural settings rather than major cities. Farmers produce the grain, olives, grapes, vegetables, and livestock that sustain urban populations. Their labor rarely appears in grand historical narratives, yet without it, the empire collapses almost immediately. The relationship between city and countryside is inseparable. Rome may dominate attention, but fields and farms quietly make Roman civilization possible. Then there are the soldiers. To modern audiences, military service often appears glamorous because history tends to focus on battles and conquest. The reality is more complicated. Service can offer pay, stability, social advancement, and opportunities unavailable elsewhere. It can also involve danger, harsh discipline, long deployments, and separation from family. For some recruits, the military represents a path upward. For others, it becomes a lifetime commitment shaped by circumstances rather than ambition. Yet regardless of individual motivations, the Roman military functions as one of the empire's largest employers and most powerful institutions. Roads, forts, supply systems, and frontier communities all generate economic activity extending far beyond warfare itself. Construction workers occupy another critical role in this growing world. The empire's appetite for infrastructure appears endless. Roads stretch across continents. Aqueducts cross valleys. Public baths expand. Temples rise. Warehouses multiply. Housing projects continue. Massive quantities of stone, brick, timber, and labor are required. Looking at surviving Roman structures today, it is easy to focus on architectural achievement while forgetting the thousands of workers who spent years turning plans into reality. Every impressive building represents countless ordinary days filled with dust, sweat, repetition, and effort. Yet perhaps the most revealing aspect of Roman work is not any individual profession, but the competition itself. Rome attracts ambitious people from across the empire because opportunities exist. A successful merchant can become wealthy. A skilled craftsman can build a reputation. A soldier can gain status. An administrator can rise through bureaucracy. These possibilities create energy, but they also create pressure. Not everyone can succeed. For every prosperous trader, many others struggle. For every influential official, countless hopefuls remain unnoticed. The city rewards talent, connections, luck, persistence, and timing, in combinations that are often impossible to predict. This unpredictability may be one reason Rome feels so alive. The future remains uncertain. Every street contains people chasing different versions of success. Some will find it, some will not. Most will settle somewhere in between. As the hours pass and the city continues its endless motion, another realization begins to emerge. Despite all the wealth flowing through the empire, much of the actual work remains invisible. The finest buildings conceal the labor behind them. Elegant banquets conceal the supply chains beneath them. Political power conceals the countless workers supporting it. The closer you look, the more Rome resembles a vast ecosystem of occupations, each dependent upon the others. Remove enough pieces and the entire structure begins to weaken. Yet there is one group of workers whose presence appears everywhere and nowhere at the same time. They cook meals, clean homes, teach children, manage businesses, row ships, mine metals, work fields, and maintain households. They help sustain nearly every aspect of Roman life, yet they exist within a social category unlike any free profession. Their labor is so deeply woven into the empire that many Romans may barely notice it. To understand how Rome truly functioned, we must now turn toward the people whose work powered much of the ancient world while granting them the fewest choices over their own lives. The deeper you look into the Roman Empire, the more you begin to notice a strange pattern. Everywhere there are signs of labor, yet many of the people performing that labor seem almost invisible. The streets are swept before dawn, meals appear on tables, baths remain supplied, warehouses function, fields produce grain, ships unload cargo, children receive instruction, businesses operate. Great households run with remarkable efficiency. The city itself feels alive, as though some unseen force keeps the machinery turning hour after hour. Eventually, an uncomfortable realization emerges. Much of that force comes from people who possess little control over their own lives. To understand Rome at its height, you cannot simply study emperors, soldiers, merchants, or senators. You must also understand slavery. Not because slavery was unique to Rome, it existed in many ancient societies, but because it became woven into Roman life so thoroughly that it touched nearly every corner of the empire. Yet even here, reality proves more complicated than popular imagination often suggests. Modern depictions sometimes reduce Roman slavery to a single image. The truth was far more varied, more contradictory, and in some ways more unsettling. The first surprise is that there was no single experience of slavery. A slave working in a silver mine could face conditions so brutal that survival itself became uncertain. A slave serving as a household secretary might spend the day handling correspondence, finances, and sensitive information. Another might teach children, manage business operations, or oversee estates. Legally, they shared the same status. Practically, their lives could be worlds apart. This difference matters because it reminds us that slavery in Rome was not one occupation. It was a social category encompassing countless roles, environments, and realities. Where did these slaves come from? The answer reveals something important about how the empire expanded. Warfare supplied many captives. When Roman armies conquered territories, prisoners could be sold into slavery. Pirates occasionally contributed to the trade as well. Children could be born into slavery. Debt and abandonment sometimes played roles in specific circumstances. Over generations, a vast population emerged whose lives became tied to the institution. Rome's military successes and its labor system often reinforced one another. Conquest produced captives. Captives became labor. Labor generated wealth. Wealth supported further expansion. Historians continue debating exactly how central slavery was to Roman economic growth, but few doubt that it formed a significant component of the imperial system. Walking through Rome, you might encounter slaves dozens of times without realizing it. A servant opening a door, a porter carrying goods, a clerk maintaining records, a cook preparing meals, a tutor accompanying children. They are present everywhere, yet Roman society often encouraged people to see their function before seeing their humanity. This may be one reason the institution endured so long. Systems become easier to maintain when individuals are viewed primarily as roles rather than people. Yet traces of individual lives still survive. Ancient inscriptions occasionally reveal names, relationships, achievements, and personal stories that cut through the anonymity. Suddenly, the invisible become visible again. A name carved into stone can bridge 2,000 years in an instant. The world of wealthy households offers perhaps the clearest example of this complexity. Elite Romans often depended heavily upon enslaved workers. Large homes could contain extensive staffs responsible for cooking, cleaning, administration, maintenance, security, childcare, and countless other tasks. Some slaves became highly trusted. Others gained specialized skills that made them valuable. A few accumulated influence within household structures. This did not eliminate their lack of freedom, but it complicates simple assumptions. Power and dependence sometimes existed simultaneously. A wealthy Roman might legally own a slave while relying upon that same individual's expertise every single day. Human relationships rarely fit neatly into categories, even within deeply unequal systems. Education presents one of the most surprising examples. Many Roman households employed educated slaves as tutors. Some possessed knowledge of literature, philosophy, mathematics, rhetoric, or languages. In certain cases, enslaved teachers helped shape the minds of future elites. Imagine the irony. A child born free and destined for influence might spend years learning from someone denied basic personal freedom. Such contradictions appear repeatedly throughout Roman society. The empire often functioned through arrangements that seem both practical and morally troubling when viewed through modern eyes. Beyond the city, enormous agricultural estates relied upon enslaved labor as well. Fields stretched across vast properties. Vineyards produced wine. Olive groves supplied oil. Livestock required constant attention. Agricultural slavery varied by region and period, but in some areas it became a major component of rural production. The scale could be immense. Yet even here, conditions differed significantly. Some estates appear to have operated under strict supervision. Others may have allowed greater autonomy in daily routines. Evidence remains incomplete, leaving room for scholarly debate. Ancient life often resists simple conclusions because surviving sources reveal only fragments of a much larger reality. If there was a place where slavery reached its harshest form, it may have been the mines. Historical accounts and archaeological evidence suggest that mining operations could be extraordinarily dangerous. Darkness, dust, injuries, exhaustion, and relentless labor created environments few would willingly choose. Mortality rates remain difficult to calculate with confidence, but many historians view mining as among the most brutal experiences available to enslaved workers. Here, the economic engine of the empire becomes impossible to separate from human cost. Precious metals, essential resources, and state revenue often emerged from conditions hidden far from public view. The wealth visible in cities sometimes originated in places most citizens would never see. Yet amid these realities, another feature of Roman slavery distinguishes it from some later systems. Manumission, the process through which slaves could gain freedom, occurred with notable frequency. Not everyone achieved it, many never did, but enough cases existed that freed people became a visible part of Roman society. Former slaves could establish businesses, accumulate wealth, marry, and participate in civic life to varying degrees depending on circumstances. Their children often enjoyed opportunities unavailable to previous generations. This possibility created a dynamic unlike what many modern audiences expect when hearing the word slavery. Freedom remained uncertain, conditional, and often difficult to obtain, but it was not always impossible. The existence of manumission raises an intriguing question. Did the possibility of freedom help stabilize the institution itself? Some scholars have suggested this. If pathways existed, however limited, they may have reduced resistance in certain contexts. Others argue that such interpretations risk minimizing the harsh realities many enslaved people endured. Both perspectives highlight how difficult it can be to understand ancient systems without imposing modern assumptions. History rarely offers simple moral equations. It presents human beings navigating circumstances that were often contradictory, imperfect, and deeply unequal. Resistance certainly existed. Slaves ran away, some rebelled. The most famous example remains the uprising led by Spartacus generations earlier. Although it occurred before the empire reached its golden age, its memory lingered. Large-scale revolts terrified Roman authorities because they revealed the vulnerability hidden beneath apparent stability. A society dependent upon coerced labor always carries a degree of risk. Control must be maintained. Trust remains limited. Fear operates in both directions. The existence of slavery created tensions that never fully disappeared. What makes the subject particularly fascinating is how deeply it penetrated daily life while remaining partially hidden from view. Many Romans probably encountered enslaved people every day without reflecting on the broader system supporting their lifestyle. Human beings possess a remarkable ability to normalize structures surrounding them. What appears shocking to outsiders can feel ordinary to insiders. This may be one of history's most enduring lessons. Entire societies can organize themselves around assumptions that later generations struggle to comprehend. As night settles over the city and lamps glow behind windows, countless enslaved individuals continue working. Some prepare evening meals, some maintain households, some guard property, some calculate accounts. Others labor in places far removed from urban life. Their experiences differ dramatically, yet together they form part of a workforce helping sustain one of history's greatest empires. The more closely you examine Rome, the more difficult it becomes to separate its achievements from the labor supporting them. Roads, aqueducts, commerce, agriculture, administration, and luxury all intersect with human lives often omitted from traditional narratives. And yet, despite the hard realities hidden beneath the surface, tomorrow many Romans will seek something else entirely. Not work, not responsibility, not survival. They will seek excitement, escape, competition, spectacle. Because when the empire wanted entertainment, it did not think small. It built some of the most astonishing venues the ancient world had ever seen and filled them with crowds hungry for experiences they would never forget. If you wanted to understand what truly excited the people of the Roman Empire, you would not begin in a Senate chamber, a library, or a temple. You would follow the crowds. Long before sunrise, they are already moving through the streets. Families, merchants, laborers, soldiers, craftsmen, wealthy elites, visitors from distant provinces. People from nearly every layer of society seem to be heading in the same direction. The energy feels different from an ordinary workday. Conversations are louder. Expectations are higher. Anticipation hangs in the air. Somewhere ahead, enormous structures rise above the cityscape, capable of holding tens of thousands of spectators. For a few hours, ordinary concerns can be set aside. Debts, work, politics, and daily struggles temporarily fade into the background. Today is about entertainment, and Rome has turned entertainment into something so massive that even by modern standards, it remains difficult to comprehend. One of the most surprising realities about the Roman Empire is that its people may have experienced some of the largest organized public spectacles the world had ever seen. Modern audiences often imagine ancient entertainment as small and primitive compared to modern sports or media. In many ways, the opposite is true. Rome understood crowds. Rome understood excitement. Rome understood how to create events capable of capturing the attention of entire cities. And perhaps most importantly, Roman leaders understood that entertainment was not merely entertainment. It was also social glue, political theater, and a demonstration of imperial power. The most famous symbol of this world is the Colosseum. Even today, its ruins dominate the imagination, yet the structure people see now is only a shadow of what ancient spectators experienced. Imagine approaching it during its prime. Bright stone gleams under sunlight. Massive awnings help provide shade. Statues decorate entrances. Crowds stream toward dozens of gates designed to move thousands of people efficiently. The building itself communicates a message before any event even begins. Rome has resources. Rome has engineering skill. Rome has confidence. Some estimates suggest the amphitheater could hold roughly 50,000 spectators, though exact numbers remain debated. Whatever the precise figure, the scale was extraordinary. Yet what happened inside may be even more fascinating than the architecture. Modern films often focus almost exclusively on gladiatorial combat, creating the impression that every event revolved around men fighting to the death. Reality appears more complex. Gladiatorial contests certainly occurred, and they were immensely popular, but they represented only part of a broader entertainment culture. Spectators might witness animal hunts, public ceremonies, theatrical displays, executions, staged historical reenactments, and various forms of spectacle designed to astonish audiences. Roman entertainment operated on multiple levels at once. Violence attracted attention, but so did novelty, skill, pageantry, and surprise. The gladiators themselves occupy an unusual place in history. Popular culture often portrays them as little more than doomed victims. Some undoubtedly faced terrible circumstances. Yet surviving evidence suggests the reality varied considerably. Many gladiators received extensive training. Some became famous. Successful fighters could earn admiration, wealth, and even a form of celebrity status. Graffiti, artwork, and written accounts suggest that certain gladiators attracted devoted fans. In some respects, they resembled athletes. In other respects, they existed within a much harsher system. This combination makes them difficult to categorize using modern comparisons. They were both performers and combatants, admired yet vulnerable, celebrated yet constrained. One of the most persistent myths surrounding gladiators is the idea that nearly every match ended in death. Historians generally question this assumption. Training gladiators required significant investment. Experienced fighters possessed value. While deaths certainly occurred, especially in certain circumstances, constantly killing trained performers would have made little economic sense. Many contests likely focused on skill, endurance, and spectacle rather than guaranteed fatalities. The truth may be less dramatic than Hollywood versions, but it is also more interesting because it reveals the practical considerations shaping Roman entertainment. Economics influenced spectacle just as much as excitement did. Then there were the animals. Exotic creatures arrived from across the empire and beyond. Lions, leopards, bears, elephants, rhinoceroses, crocodiles, and countless other species appeared in public displays. To many spectators, these animals represented more than curiosity. They symbolized Rome's reach into distant lands. Every exotic creature demonstrated that the empire extended far beyond the horizon. A citizen who never traveled beyond Italy could still witness animals from Africa, the Near East, or other remote regions. Entertainment became a way of making the empire feel tangible. Geography itself entered the arena. Yet for all the attention given to the Colosseum, another venue may have generated even greater passion. To discover it, you must leave the amphitheater and follow another crowd, one perhaps even larger than the last. Ahead stretches a structure so vast that modern visitors often struggle to grasp its scale. This is the Circus Maximus, and here the empire's greatest obsession unfolds: chariot racing. If gladiators were celebrities, charioteers could become superstars. The races combined speed, danger, competition, tribal loyalty, gambling, and spectacle into an irresistible package. Teams identified by colors, such as blues, greens, reds, and whites, attracted devoted supporters. Fans argued, cheered, celebrated victories, blamed losses. In some ways, the atmosphere feels surprisingly familiar to anyone who has attended a major sporting event. Human beings have always enjoyed choosing sides. What makes chariot racing remarkable is its scale. Ancient sources suggest the Circus Maximus may have accommodated well over 100,000 spectators, and perhaps substantially more depending on the period and configuration. Exact numbers remain debated, but it was unquestionably one of the largest entertainment venues in history. Imagine the sound generated by such a crowd, the thunder of hooves, the roar of spectators, the tension as racers approach dangerous turns, the sudden shifts in fortune when a wheel breaks or a driver loses control. Chariot racing was not merely popular, it may have been the single most popular spectator sport in the Roman world. The danger contributed significantly to its appeal. The races were fast. The tracks were crowded. Crashes occurred frequently. Drivers risked serious injury or death. Yet danger has always fascinated audiences. Part of the excitement comes from uncertainty. Nobody knows exactly what will happen next. A favorite can lose. An underdog can win. Disaster can strike in seconds. The same psychological forces driving modern sports fandom operated in Rome as well. Technology changes. Human emotions remain surprisingly constant. Entertainment also served political purposes. Emperors sponsored games. Wealthy elites funded public spectacles. Providing entertainment could generate goodwill, reinforce status, and strengthen social bonds. Some historians emphasize the famous phrase, bread and circuses, suggesting leaders used entertainment primarily to distract the population. There may be some truth in this interpretation, but it is probably incomplete. People genuinely enjoyed these events. They attended because they wanted to, not merely because they were manipulated. The relationship between public entertainment and political power was likely more complicated than a simple formula. Leaders benefited from successful spectacles, but spectators were not passive participants. They brought their own passions, preferences, and expectations. Looking across the crowd, another detail becomes apparent. These events gather people who might rarely interact elsewhere. Rich and poor, citizens and visitors, merchants and laborers. Entertainment creates a shared experience. For a few hours, social divisions blur, not disappear, but soften. Thousands focus on the same race, the same contest, the same dramatic moment. Large societies often need such shared experiences to maintain cohesion. Whether intentionally designed for that purpose or not, Roman spectacles helped create a sense of collective identity. Yet there remains something unsettling beneath the excitement. Modern audiences often feel conflicted when examining Roman entertainment. Some aspects seem familiar. Athletic competition, celebrity culture, team loyalty, massive crowds, public events. Other aspects feel profoundly foreign. Violence occupies a more visible role. Public executions occasionally become part of spectacles. Animal hunts raise ethical questions. The combination forces us to confront an uncomfortable possibility. Entertainment reflects the values of its society. By studying what people enjoy, we learn something about how they see the world. The Romans were not uniquely cruel, nor were they simply modern people in ancient clothing. They inhabited a different cultural landscape shaped by assumptions that can feel simultaneously recognizable and alien. As the crowd slowly disperses and shadows lengthen across the city, conversations continue. Fans debate outcomes. Friends retell dramatic moments. Victories are celebrated. Disappointments are analyzed. Tomorrow, work will return. Responsibilities will return. Daily struggles will return. But for one extraordinary day, the empire gathered to watch spectacle on a scale few civilizations had ever achieved. And as the noise gradually fades into evening, another side of Roman life begins to emerge. Away from arenas and racetracks, behind household doors and family walls, people return to the relationships that shape nearly every aspect of human existence. Because no matter how large an empire becomes, it is ultimately built one family at a time. As the excitement of the arena fades into memory and the city settles into the softer rhythms of evening, another side of Roman life begins to reveal itself. Behind the noise of markets, behind the power of emperors, behind the wealth flowing through ports and roads, there exists something far more personal. Every empire, no matter how vast, is ultimately built from households. Behind every soldier stands a family. Behind every merchant, a marriage. Behind every senator, generations of relatives whose ambitions, alliances, and sacrifices helped shape his future. If public life belonged to Rome, private life belonged to the family. And in many ways, understanding the Roman family may bring us closer to the real people of the empire than any monument ever could. From the outside, a Roman household might appear familiar. Parents raising children, couples sharing responsibilities, relatives gathering for meals. Yet the deeper you look, the more differences emerge. Family in ancient Rome was not simply an emotional unit. It was also an economic institution, a political alliance, a social network, and often a strategy for survival. Love existed, certainly, but it was rarely the only consideration. Marriage connected families. Property moved through generations. Status had to be maintained. Children represented not only affection, but continuity. The household was the foundation upon which much of Roman society rested. At the center of many Roman families stood the paterfamilias, the male head of the household. Modern readers are often surprised by the legal authority associated with this role. In theory, Roman law granted fathers extraordinary power over family affairs. Historians continue debating how often these powers were exercised to their fullest extent in everyday life. But the legal framework itself reveals something important about Roman values. Authority was expected. Hierarchy was expected. Family relationships existed within structures that emphasized duty as much as affection. Yet law and reality are rarely identical. Ancient letters, inscriptions, and personal writings occasionally reveal fathers grieving children, praising their accomplishments, and expressing emotions that feel strikingly familiar. The legal system may have emphasized authority, but human relationships often followed more complicated paths. Marriage itself carried layers of meaning beyond romance. For wealthy families especially, marriages frequently involved practical considerations. Alliances between influential households could strengthen political positions, preserve wealth, or improve social standing. Yet this does not necessarily mean affection was absent. One of the challenges in studying ancient relationships is avoiding false choices. People can marry for practical reasons and still develop deep emotional bonds. Historical evidence suggests Roman marriages varied enormously depending on personality, class, circumstance, and individual experience. Some unions appear genuinely affectionate. Others likely remained transactional. Most probably existed somewhere in between. Human relationships have always resisted simple categories. For women, life within the Roman family presents a particularly fascinating picture. Popular imagination often portrays Roman women as entirely powerless, yet the evidence suggests a more nuanced reality. Compared to women in some other ancient societies, many Roman women, especially those from wealthier backgrounds, could exercise significant influence within households and communities. They managed property, supervised businesses, oversaw family finances, and shaped social networks. Legal restrictions certainly existed, and Roman society remained fundamentally patriarchal. But influence does not always require formal authority. Throughout history, power often operates through channels that laws fail to capture fully. Looking closely at Roman families reveals women whose roles were often more substantial than simplistic stereotypes suggest. Children occupied a central place in Roman life, though childhood itself could feel very different from modern expectations. Life expectancy was lower, disease was more common. Infant mortality remained a tragic reality for many families. Some historians estimate that a significant percentage of children never reached adulthood, though exact figures varied by region and circumstance. This reality shaped family life in profound ways. Parents invested hope in their children while understanding that the future offered no guarantees. Ancient epitaphs sometimes preserve heartbreaking expressions of grief from mothers and fathers mourning sons and daughters lost too soon. Across 2,000 years, such emotions remain instantly recognizable. Ambition for children often began early. Education became increasingly important, particularly for families seeking advancement. Wealthier households might hire tutors. Boys destined for public careers learned rhetoric, literature, and public speaking. Girls also received education, though opportunities varied significantly according to family resources and social expectations. Literacy itself carried advantages. The ability to read, write, calculate, and communicate effectively could influence future opportunities. In a world where status mattered greatly, education offered one pathway toward success. Yet perhaps the most revealing aspect of Roman family life is not found in legal texts or educational practices, but in everyday routines. Imagine a household gathering for an evening meal. Conversations move between practical concerns and personal matters. Business opportunities are discussed. News circulates. Family stories are retold. Advice is offered. Plans are made. The scene feels surprisingly familiar. Across centuries, families continue performing many of the same functions. They provide identity. They transmit values. They offer support during uncertainty. Technology changes. Political systems change. Human needs remain remarkably consistent. Love, of course, existed within this world, though not always in forms modern audiences expect. Roman literature preserves countless stories of passion, devotion, jealousy, heartbreak, and longing. Poets wrote extensively about romance. Lovers exchanged letters. Husbands mourned wives. Wives mourned husbands. Some inscriptions reveal astonishing tenderness. One surviving epitaph might summarize decades of shared life in a few carefully chosen words. Another might celebrate loyalty, kindness, or companionship. These fragments suggest that beneath legal structures and social expectations lived individuals experiencing emotions every bit as complex as our own. Yet love could also create tension. Expectations imposed by family, class, and society sometimes conflicted with personal desires. A marriage advantageous for one family might not satisfy the individuals involved. Ambition could compete with affection. Duty could compete with personal happiness. Such conflicts appear repeatedly throughout Roman history and literature because they reflect enduring human dilemmas. The more things change, the more certain struggles seem to persist. Divorce presents another surprising aspect of Roman life. Contrary to some assumptions, divorce was not unknown or exceptionally rare. In certain periods, particularly among the upper classes, marriages could end through relatively straightforward procedures. This does not mean divorce was emotionally easy or socially insignificant. It simply reveals that Roman society often approached marriage with a degree of practicality alongside its emotional dimensions. Relationships could begin. Relationships could end. Families adapted. Life continued. To modern observers, this flexibility can feel unexpectedly familiar. Yet even within the household, social divisions remained visible. Enslaved people often lived and worked alongside family members. Freed individuals maintained connections with former owners. Extended relatives, clients, and dependents moved through household spaces. Roman families rarely existed in isolation. They functioned as parts of broader social networks extending across neighborhoods, professions, and generations. The home served not only as a private refuge, but also as a hub of relationships linking individuals to the wider world. As night deepens and lamps cast warm light across courtyards and dining rooms, another realization slowly emerges. The strength of Rome may not have rested solely upon armies, roads, or political institutions. It may also have depended upon countless families raising children, maintaining traditions, managing resources, and navigating life's uncertainties one generation after another. Empires often appear grand when viewed from a distance, but up close they are deeply personal. They are built from ordinary moments repeated millions of times. A conversation between spouses, a parent's advice, a child's education, a family's hopes for the future. Yet even as families gathered beneath Roman roofs, another force quietly shaped the world around them. It flowed through roads, bridges, aqueducts, ports, baths, and buildings. It allowed cities to grow larger than many thought possible. It connected distant provinces into a functioning system. And unlike the emotions hidden within households, this force was visible everywhere. It was technology, not technology in the modern sense of electronics and machines, but technology powerful enough to transform an ancient civilization and leave traces that still survive nearly 2,000 years later. If a traveler from the modern world could spend a single day inside the Roman Empire at its height, One of the greatest surprises might not be the armies, the temples, or even the wealth. It might be how strangely modern certain parts of daily life would feel. Not modern because of electricity or computers, of course, but because beneath the surface of Roman society existed an invisible network of engineering solutions quietly shaping almost everything people did. Most citizens probably never stopped to think about it. Water flowed, roads worked, bridges stood, buildings endured, goods arrived, life continued. Yet behind every ordinary convenience stood generations of experimentation, observation, and practical problem-solving. Rome did not become one of history's most successful civilizations simply because it conquered territory. It became powerful because it learned how to organize the physical world. The deeper you look, the more impressive that achievement becomes. The easiest place to begin is with something so common that many Romans likely took it for granted: water. Imagine standing on a hillside outside the city and watching a line of stone arches stretch across the landscape. Some aqueducts crossed valleys, others disappeared into tunnels. Together, they formed one of the most ambitious water systems the ancient world had ever seen. Water traveled for miles, sometimes dozens of miles, guided almost entirely by gravity. No electric pumps, no modern machinery, just careful engineering and an extraordinary understanding of gradients. What makes this achievement remarkable is not merely that it worked. It is that it worked consistently. A slight error in elevation could ruin an entire project. Yet Roman engineers repeatedly managed to deliver enormous quantities of water into growing urban centers. Even today, standing beneath the remains of an aqueduct can feel almost surreal, because the scale suggests a civilization thinking far beyond immediate needs. Water entered fountains, baths, workshops, gardens, and homes. It improved sanitation. It supported public life. It allowed cities to grow larger than many other ancient societies could sustain. Yet aqueducts reveal only part of the story. Once water arrived, it had to go somewhere. Here, another Roman innovation begins to emerge. Beneath bustling streets, drainage systems carried away waste and excess water. Some structures became famous, such as the Cloaca Maxima, whose origins stretched back centuries before the empire reached its peak. Historians continue debating exactly how effective Roman sanitation was compared to modern expectations. Some evidence suggests significant health challenges still existed. Urban life remained crowded and vulnerable to disease. Yet the willingness to invest in large-scale infrastructure demonstrates something important about Roman priorities. They understood that cities required systems. A city was not merely a collection of buildings. It was a living organism whose survival depended upon hidden networks functioning properly beneath the surface. The same mindset appears in Roman roads. Modern people often hear the phrase, "all roads lead to Rome," without fully appreciating what made Roman roads so extraordinary. The empire built and maintained tens of thousands of miles of routes connecting provinces, cities, military installations, and commercial centers. These roads were not accidental paths formed by repeated travel. They were engineered. Layers of materials created stable surfaces. Drainage reduced erosion. Routes often followed remarkably direct lines across landscapes. Some sections remained usable for centuries. Standing on one of these roads, you begin to understand that Rome was not only connecting places, it was compressing distance itself. Travel remained slow by modern standards, but roads transformed movement into something more reliable and predictable. Information traveled faster. Armies responded more quickly. Trade expanded. The empire became easier to govern. Every mile of road represented another thread binding distant regions together. Bridges extended this logic even further. Rivers naturally divide landscapes. For many societies, they create obstacles. Roman engineers increasingly viewed them as challenges waiting to be solved. Stone arches allowed bridges to distribute weight efficiently while resisting powerful currents. Some Roman bridges survived for astonishing lengths of time, and a few continue carrying traffic today after nearly 2 millennia. This longevity raises a fascinating question. Were Roman engineers consciously building for eternity, or were they simply building as well as they knew how? The answer may lie somewhere between. Regardless of intention, many Roman structures outlasted the political system that created them. In some places, the empire vanished while its infrastructure remained. Then there is the mystery that continues attracting scientists today: Roman concrete. At first glance, concrete sounds far less exciting than aqueducts or roads. Yet it may be one of Rome's greatest technological achievements. Certain Roman harbor structures exposed to seawater have survived for remarkably long periods. Modern researchers studying ancient concrete have discovered chemical processes that appear to strengthen some materials over time under specific conditions. The story is still being investigated, and debates continue regarding exactly how Roman formulas compare with modern concrete technologies. Yet one thing is clear: Roman builders possessed knowledge that allowed them to create structures of extraordinary durability. The Pantheon, with its massive concrete dome, remains perhaps the most famous example. Nearly 2,000 years later, it still stands. Looking upward beneath that dome, it becomes difficult not to wonder what future generations will think when they examine our own buildings. Technology in Rome extended beyond grand monuments. Public baths provide a particularly revealing example. To modern visitors, baths often appear luxurious. In reality, they served multiple purposes. People exercised, socialized, conducted business, relaxed, and cleaned themselves. Some complexes were enormous. Heating systems circulated warm air beneath floors and inside walls. Managing temperatures across large facilities required planning, labor, and technical knowledge. A visitor entering one of these baths might encounter architecture rivaling many public buildings elsewhere in the ancient world. What is striking is not only that the technology existed, but that large numbers of ordinary people could access it. Roman engineering frequently operated at scale. The empire excelled at taking solutions and applying them across vast populations. Construction itself reveals another hidden layer of Roman expertise. Cranes, pulleys, scaffolding, and lifting devices allowed workers to move massive stone blocks. Contrary to popular imagination, ancient builders were not simply relying on brute force. Mechanical advantage mattered. Engineering mattered. Planning mattered. Watching a major construction project in Rome would likely have looked surprisingly sophisticated. Thousands of workers coordinated efforts across years or even decades. Materials arrived from distant regions. Specialists performed specific tasks. Large projects became exercises in logistics as much as architecture. This ability to organize resources may have been just as important as technical knowledge itself. After all, a brilliant design means little if materials never arrive and workers cannot coordinate their efforts. Yet perhaps the most fascinating aspect of Roman technology is that much of it feels almost invisible. Citizens waking each morning rarely pause to admire road foundations or drainage channels. They simply used them. The greatest technologies often disappear into daily life. They become so reliable that people stop noticing them. In this sense, Rome achieved something many civilizations strive for. It transformed engineering into normality. The empire's infrastructure became part of the background. Success became invisible. Of course, it is important not to exaggerate. Roman technology had limits. Productivity remained constrained by pre-industrial realities. Scientific methods differed from modern approaches. Many inventions we take for granted remained centuries away. Yet judging Roman achievements solely by what they lacked misses the larger story. The remarkable question is not why Rome failed to invent modern technology. The remarkable question is how much it accomplished without it. Looking across roads, aqueducts, bridges, ports, baths, and monumental buildings, you begin to see a civilization that understood something fundamental. Power is not merely the ability to conquer territory. Power is the ability to organize people, materials, knowledge, and infrastructure into systems that continue functioning day after day. That insight may explain why traces of Rome still surround us, not because every Roman invention was unique, but because the empire excelled at turning practical solutions into civilization-wide networks. And as impressive as those networks were, they served an even larger purpose. They connected a world stretching across continents, linking distant peoples, languages, cultures, and economies into a single system so vast that many citizens could travel for months and still remain inside the same empire. The next question is almost inevitable. What did it actually feel like to live inside one of the largest and most interconnected political systems the ancient world had ever known? There is a moment that may have happened countless times during the height of the Roman Empire. A traveler stands beside a road somewhere far from Rome itself. Perhaps he is in the forests of Gaul. Perhaps near the deserts of Syria. Perhaps on the rocky coast of Hispania, or among the green hills of Britannia. He looks around and sees unfamiliar landscapes, hears different accents, encounters customs unlike those of his hometown. And yet, he remains inside the same political world. The laws are recognizable. Roman coins are accepted. Imperial officials operate nearby. Soldiers patrol distant frontiers. Messages travel along connected routes. Somehow, despite the enormous distances involved, the empire still feels present. This may be one of the strangest aspects of Roman life for modern observers to fully grasp. Living in the Roman Empire did not simply mean living in a powerful state. It meant living inside one of the largest interconnected systems humanity had ever created. During its golden age, the empire stretched across 3 continents and surrounded much of the Mediterranean Sea. To many people, Rome was not merely a city, it was the center of an entire world. Yet what did that actually feel like for ordinary individuals? The answer begins with distance. Today, crossing thousands of miles can take hours. In the Roman world, distance remained real, difficult, and expensive. A journey that feels routine now could require weeks or even months. And yet, compared to many earlier societies, Rome dramatically reduced the practical barriers separating regions. Roads connected provinces. Sea routes linked ports. Administrative systems created predictability. The empire did not eliminate distance, but it made distance more manageable. This distinction matters because it transformed how people thought about the world around them. For perhaps the first time in history, large numbers of people lived within a political system that extended far beyond anything they could personally see. A merchant in southern Gaul might never visit Egypt, but Egyptian grain could still affect local markets. A soldier stationed near the Danube might hear news from Judea. A citizen living in North Africa might use coins minted thousands of miles away. Daily life increasingly reflected connections stretching across enormous spaces. The Mediterranean itself became the empire's great highway. Looking at a map today, it is easy to see a sea dividing continents. The Romans often saw something different. They saw a route. Water frequently allowed movement more efficiently than land. Ships carried grain, wine, olive oil, stone, timber, metals, textiles, and countless other goods between distant regions. Ports bustled with activity. Sailors navigated seasonal winds. Merchants calculated risks and profits. Entire communities depended upon maritime trade. The sea did not separate the empire. In many ways, it united it. Some historians have even suggested that the Mediterranean functioned less like a barrier and more like a central avenue connecting diverse populations. Whether one fully accepts that interpretation or not, there is little doubt that maritime networks helped make Roman scale possible. The empire was too large to function without them. Yet the most remarkable aspect may not have been movement itself, but reliability. A merchant investing in trade wanted predictability. A governor administering a province needed communication. A traveler crossing multiple regions depended upon infrastructure and security. Complete safety never existed, of course. Storms occurred, bandits existed, political instability occasionally disrupted routes. But compared with many earlier periods, Rome offered an environment where long-distance movement became more practical than many people previously thought possible. This relative stability created opportunities. Trade expanded, migration increased, ideas spread. Entire communities became linked through economic relationships. For ordinary people, these connections often appeared in subtle ways. Consider the contents of a simple marketplace: olive oil from one province, pottery from another, wine from a third. Spices arriving through vast commercial networks extending beyond imperial borders. Goods traveled astonishing distances before reaching consumers. A person buying everyday items might unknowingly participate in economic systems spanning thousands of miles. Modern globalization often feels uniquely contemporary, yet Rome experienced something that, while smaller in scale, reflected similar principles. Different regions specialized in different products. Resources moved where demand existed. Economic interdependence became increasingly important. Of course, this interconnectedness produced vulnerabilities as well as benefits. A poor harvest in one region could affect another. Disruptions to trade routes could influence prices far away. Dependence creates efficiency, but it also creates exposure. Human societies continue wrestling with this balance even today. Language offers another fascinating window into life inside the empire. Latin dominated administration and much of public life in the western provinces. Greek remained enormously influential in the eastern Mediterranean. Alongside them existed countless local languages, dialects, and cultural traditions. Contrary to popular imagination, Rome did not erase diversity. It governed diversity. This distinction helps explain how such a large empire endured for so long. In many places, local identities survived while Roman institutions expanded around them. A person could simultaneously belong to a local community and to the wider imperial system. Identity was layered rather than singular. Walking through a major city, you might hear multiple languages in a single afternoon. The empire's scale created encounters between people who otherwise would never have met. Some of these encounters generated cooperation, others produced tension, but all reflected the reality of a world becoming increasingly connected. Roman citizenship reveals another important dimension of this story. During different periods, citizenship carried varying privileges and meanings. Over time, access expanded. What began as something relatively limited gradually reached broader populations. Scholars continue debating the motivations behind these changes. Were they primarily practical, political, economic? Probably some combination of all three. Regardless of the reasons, the result was significant. More people came to see themselves as participants in a shared system extending far beyond local boundaries. This sense of belonging may have strengthened imperial cohesion in ways military force alone could never achieve. People are often more willing to support systems in which they possess a recognized place. Yet, even at its height, the empire remained uneven. Wealth varied dramatically between regions. Urban centers often enjoyed advantages unavailable to rural communities. Frontier zones faced challenges unknown in safer areas. The experience of empire differed depending upon where you lived. Someone residing in a prosperous coastal city might view Roman rule very differently from a farmer living near a troubled border. Historical narratives sometimes describe the empire as though everyone experienced it the same way. Reality was far more complicated. Large systems rarely feel identical from every perspective. Perhaps the most extraordinary achievement of Rome was not that it controlled vast territory. Other empires had ruled large areas before. The remarkable achievement was maintaining enough order, communication, infrastructure, and administration to make those territories feel connected. The empire functioned not merely as conquered land, but as a network. Roads linked communities. Laws established expectations. Coins facilitated trade. Ports enabled commerce. Military forces provided security. Information moved. Goods moved. People moved. Connections multiplied. Looking across this immense system, one begins to understand why many contemporaries may have viewed Roman power as permanent. It seemed everywhere. The roads worked. The trade networks worked. The cities flourished. The frontiers held. For those living during the Golden Age, imagining the end of such a world may have felt difficult. Human beings often assume successful systems will continue because they have already continued for so long. Stability creates confidence. Confidence creates expectations. Expectations become assumptions. Yet history repeatedly demonstrates that even the most impressive structures contain hidden weaknesses. Sometimes those weaknesses remain invisible during periods of success. Sometimes prosperity itself conceals emerging problems. The Roman Empire appeared powerful beyond comparison, but beneath the surface, forces were already gathering that future generations would struggle to control. And as remarkable as life inside this interconnected world could be, the story of Rome's Golden Age cannot be fully understood without confronting a final question. If this empire seemed so strong, so wealthy, so technologically advanced, and so deeply connected, why did the age that many later generations would remember as Rome's greatest era contain the seeds of future challenges already quietly taking root? As the sun sets on our journey through the Roman Empire, one final illusion begins to fade. For hours, we have walked through crowded streets, watched merchants trade goods from distant lands, admired engineering that still astonishes modern researchers, entered homes, markets, baths, arenas, and ports, and witnessed a civilization operating at a scale few societies had ever achieved. It is tempting to stop there, to look at the Roman Empire during its Golden Age and see only success. To imagine a world that had somehow solved the problems that troubled earlier civilizations. To believe that the people living beneath the reigns of capable emperors stood at the summit of history with nothing but prosperity ahead. Yet history rarely works that way. In fact, one of the strangest patterns in human civilization is that the warning signs of future difficulties often become visible precisely when a society appears strongest. The Roman Empire may have reached its greatest heights during this era, but hidden beneath the confidence, wealth, and stability were tensions that few people could fully see. The first clue was wealth itself. Walking through Rome, it was impossible not to notice luxury. Marble-covered walls, villas expanded across hillsides, imported goods filled markets. Public buildings displayed immense resources. Yet prosperity was not shared equally. Some individuals accumulated extraordinary fortunes. Ancient writers occasionally described elites possessing estates so large that they stretched across multiple regions. Meanwhile, many ordinary citizens lived much closer to economic uncertainty. Historians continue debating the exact scale of inequality, but surviving evidence suggests significant differences between the wealthiest members of society and everyone else. This was not unique to Rome. Most pre-modern societies displayed inequality, yet success sometimes made the gap more visible. The richer the empire became, the easier it was to notice how unevenly that wealth was distributed. A person standing beside a magnificent villa might only need to walk a short distance before encountering crowded housing and people struggling to maintain stability. Great civilizations often contain multiple realities existing side by side. Another challenge emerged from the very thing that made Rome successful: expansion. For centuries, conquest had brought new resources, new land, new wealth, and new opportunities. Victories rewarded soldiers, captives supplied labor, provinces generated taxes, expansion created momentum. But what happens when a civilization grows so large that further expansion becomes increasingly difficult? Historians have explored this question for generations. Some argue that Rome eventually reached practical limits. Others emphasize political and economic factors over territorial concerns. The debate continues, but the underlying issue remains fascinating. Systems built during periods of growth sometimes struggle when growth slows. Expectations remain. Costs remain. Institutions remain. Yet the conditions that helped create success begin to change. The empire's golden age may have represented not only a peak of achievement, but also a turning point where old formulas became harder to sustain. Geography created challenges as well. Rome's frontiers stretched across enormous distances. Rivers, deserts, mountains, forests, and coastlines all required protection. Maintaining security along such vast borders demanded resources, manpower, and coordination. During stable periods, the system functioned remarkably well. Yet stability itself could create complacency. Many citizens living deep within the empire rarely witnessed frontier tensions directly. Life continued normally. Markets remained busy. Entertainment continued. Families raised children. Trade flourished. The edges of the empire often felt very far away. But history repeatedly demonstrates that distant problems have a way of becoming local problems. A pressure building quietly on a frontier may seem insignificant until it suddenly is not. Disease represented another hidden vulnerability. Modern medicine has transformed how we think about illness, making it easy to forget how uncertain health remained throughout most of human history. Dense cities created opportunities for commerce, innovation, and cultural exchange, but they also created opportunities for pathogens. Trade routes moved goods efficiently, yet they could also help diseases travel. During the 2nd century, the Antonine Plague spread across parts of the empire, leaving profound consequences. Historians continue debating exact mortality figures, and many details remain uncertain. But the outbreak reminds us how fragile even powerful societies can be. No amount of engineering can fully eliminate biological realities. A civilization may control roads, armies, and laws, yet still struggle against forces too small to see. Looking deeper, another question begins to emerge. Did Romans themselves recognize these vulnerabilities? The answer is probably both yes and no. Some certainly noticed problems. Ancient authors complained about corruption, moral decline, political ambition, economic pressures, and social tensions. Every generation tends to believe it is witnessing unique challenges, and the Romans were no exception. Yet, complaints alone do not necessarily indicate impending collapse. Societies always contain critics. The more difficult question is whether anyone could distinguish ordinary problems from truly significant ones while living through them. This may be one of history's greatest mysteries. Future outcomes often seem obvious in retrospect. They rarely feel obvious in the present. To a merchant making profits, a family raising children, or a citizen enjoying public festivals, the empire probably looked durable. Most people do not wake up believing they live at the beginning of a long decline. Another subtle issue involved administration itself. Governing a vast empire required extraordinary coordination. Laws had to be enforced. Taxes had to be collected. Officials had to manage distant provinces. Communication had limits. Information traveled far more slowly than today. Decisions made in one region could take weeks or months to influence another. During periods of competent leadership, the system performed impressively. Yet, large systems often become increasingly dependent upon effective management. Success creates complexity. Complexity creates vulnerability. A small failure in a simple society may remain small. A small failure in a highly interconnected society can sometimes spread much further. Sound familiar? It should. Modern civilizations continue facing similar challenges. The technologies differ. The underlying dynamics often do not. Environmental pressures may have played a role as well. Historians and scientists continue investigating how climate fluctuations, resource management, agricultural productivity, and ecological changes affected the ancient world. Some findings suggest environmental factors influenced political and economic developments. Others caution against overly simple explanations. The evidence remains complex. Yet the possibility itself is revealing. Human societies do not exist separately from nature. They depend upon harvests, water supplies, weather patterns, and ecological stability. The Romans built extraordinary infrastructure, but even the most powerful empire remained connected to forces beyond its control. Perhaps the most fascinating aspect of Rome's Golden Age is that many of these challenges remained invisible precisely because the empire functioned so well. Roads still worked, trade still flowed, cities still prospered, public buildings still impressed visitors. Success can hide weaknesses. When systems operate effectively, people stop examining them closely. Confidence grows, assumptions harden, stability begins to feel permanent. Yet permanence is often an illusion. Every civilization, no matter how powerful, exists within time. Some last centuries, some last millennia. None last forever. This does not diminish their achievements. If anything, it makes them more remarkable. The Roman Empire did not fail because it was weak. It faced challenges because it was vast, complex, interconnected, and deeply human. The very qualities that enabled its greatness also generated new forms of risk. And perhaps that is the final lesson hidden within the Roman Golden Age. Not a moral lesson, but an observation about civilization itself. The most successful societies are rarely simple. They solve old problems while creating new ones. They generate wealth while producing inequality. They connect distant regions while increasing dependence. They achieve stability while accumulating hidden vulnerabilities. Looking back across the centuries, Rome appears both familiar and distant. Familiar because its people worried about work, family, health, opportunity, status, and the future. Distant because they inhabited a world shaped by assumptions very different from our own. Yet, after spending a day in their empire, something becomes clear. The Romans did not know they were living inside a chapter that future generations would call a golden age. They were simply living their lives, buying bread, raising children, attending races, building roads, managing businesses, and making plans for tomorrow. Perhaps that is what makes their story so compelling. History often remembers eras through labels like rise, decline, prosperity, or collapse. The people inside those eras rarely see such labels. They see only the next day waiting beyond the horizon. And as darkness settles across the empire and the lamps begin to glow once more, Rome remains what it always was at its heart. Not merely a collection of monuments or emperors, but millions of human lives woven together into one of the most extraordinary civilizations the world has ever known. Thank you for spending this evening with Sleep History Night. If you enjoyed this journey through the ancient world, please consider subscribing to the channel. Until next time, rest well, sleep peacefully, and thank you for being here.